Guys, Dan here, co-founder of PromptHub. Today we'll be looking at how you can integrate PromptHub when you're using Anthropic models in your environment. So a couple of resources that we'll link below. We have an integration guide with Anthropic that you'll find below, as well as a public Postman collection that you can check out for more info on requests, a little bit deeper depth on the guide as well, if you want like a text-based format. So we'll be looking at basically how to use PromptHub's two main endpoints when using Anthropic as your model or model provider. We're using one of the Claude models as your model. Before we even get into that, why would you want to do something like this rather than just like hard coding your prompts into your code? Well, centralizing your prompts in a place allows everyone to see them. You can create a kind of version control system within PromptHub. We have commits, we have branches, pull requests, admin, user permissions. Gives you like extra layers of security, keeps everyone on the same page, makes it easy to track things over time. The API integration is like a one-time setup, and it's pretty quick, as you'll see in this video. And then generally decoupling prompt engineering from software engineering is good. It allows you to make changes to your prompts without having to deploy new code, switch models easily, the whole 9 yards. And so what you'll need, PromptHub account, which is free, API key, which is free to generate under your account settings. So click your avatar in the upper right, and then it's towards the bottom. And of course, Anthropic API key. If you want to test this locally, just like some libraries, which we'll touch on later. And then you'll need to have a PromptHub project with a commit. And for this, we'll be using an example of a feedback classifier that I just committed. So as a system message and then a prompt where we will pass feedback to be classified. So using the head endpoint, there's 3 steps. You get the data from us that has your prompt and your model config. You add your data. So you pass your variables through from your application to, in this case, we'll be passing it through to the product feedback variable. So it's dynamic. And then you send that to Anthropic to process. So again, the head endpoint from a high level, it retrieves the latest version of your prompt. All you need is project ID, which you can find under the API tab, which we'll see in a second. And then the URL looks like this. Everything is static except for the ID. You can also pass a branch as a query parameter. So if you're using multiple branches within PromptHub and you want to say, hey, give me this version that's on staging, and then let's test that in our staging environment, and then we can move it in PromptHub from staging to production, and our production pull the latest one from the production branch. That's possible as well. As I mentioned, you could find the ID under the API tab in this URL here that's already built for you, or you can find it in actually the URL bar of the page itself. And so getting the project is really straightforward. You just pass the ID, configure your headers, add a bearer token, and you are good to go. And what we'll really be looking at is the formatted request field in the response. This will have the model, the system message, which is outside of the messages array for Anthropic, which is different from how OpenAI handles it. The messages array, the max tokens, temperature, and then the variables dictionary, which will have the variable key and value pairs. It's important to note, PromptHub versions your system message, your prompt, whatever you have as like that text, but we also will version your model config. So if you change the model or the parameters, that will update automatically as well. So as I mentioned, we're really interested in that formatted request field, and this is what it looks like. You'll get more data back, but this is focusing on the formatted request. We see the model, the system message, what they just call system, which is outside of the messages array. Then we see the messages, classify the following feedback about blah. We see all of the parameters, and then we see the variables down here where we have the default value from PromptHub, but we can overwrite that. And so what we're going to do is we want to replace the variables in the system message and the messages array with something else, something dynamic. And so because they're in a different spot, then the system message is not in the messages array, we'll need to first look for variables in the system message, just in case in the future we add one. If you're not going to do that, you can kind of skip this whole block here. But basically, we're looking for text that matches our syntax, which is the double curly braces, and then we'll replace it. We do that in the messages array, so we'll iterate through all of that. And then we will essentially inject custom data that way. Yeah, there you go. You can see at the bottom here, we are kind of extracting these things so then we can later fill them in. So injecting data into variables, again, we're looking to inject data into this product feedback variable. We already have found it via the last script that looked for the double curly braces. And now we're just going to replace the variables with some data that we want from our application. So it's pretty straightforward, pretty easy to implement. Again, the guide is below. This is a good example. The guide has slightly more detailed code examples as well. And so from a high level, again, what it's doing is looking at the system field, looking for those double curly braces, looking in the messages array, looking for those double curly braces, and then we can, you can replace them with whatever you want from your application. And then we're just going to call the Anthropic API. So basically, we just need to prepare the payload with what we have from our end to match the setup from Anthropic. And because we format it already based on the model provider, it's basically just good to go. You can see we're mapping it exactly here. And so it's important to note that this formatted request field does change if you change your model provider. So if you were to change it to OpenAI, the system message would be in the messages array, and that would be handled slightly different. So benefits of doing things this way: you implement it once and it will update, as much as you make changes in PromptHub. You can separate your prompts from your code, which we think is generally good. You get all the version control features. So if you need to do branching, roll back, you have that all there. You can have a system of record. You can have environment-specific prompts based on branching, and then the data stays in your system. So you're not proxying the requests through us. So next we'll come to our run endpoint. In this case, you would be proxying the request through us. So basically the run endpoint is you have a prompt in PromptHub that you committed. You want to run that prompt. You pass variables to us, and then we give you the output from the LLM. And so the benefit of that is we can log the requests for you, and it'll be under the logs tab for that project in the PromptHub application. Super straightforward. Again, only need the project ID, which we went over how to find that earlier. You just insert that right before the ending. And you can also add a query parameter again for either the branch or the hash. And then for the variables, you just pass that along in the body of the request. And so in this case, I would be passing along a hard-coded value that says the product is not good. So again, pretty straightforward. We basically just write this payload that has the variable information, set up the headers, make the request. And then this is the response back. So this is all the data we get back. The text field is what we are most interested in. This is the output from the LLM is the text field. So we can see positive feedback was the response for this specific example. And yeah, there's other stuff in here that you could use as well. And so when to use this, it's much easier to integrate it this way. It's just it's less setup, it's less code. You could still switch models and providers really easily without having to make any code changes. And then we can log it to the dashboard for you. And so it really comes down, biggest thing that it usually comes down to teams is whether or not you want to proxy the request and have the data kind of live on that dashboard. We take security very seriously. We're in the process of getting our SOC 2. And so that if you want to talk about that at a security level, we're happy to discuss that as well. And that is it. Hope this helps.